Hello, I'm Walt Heyer, and I want to start by telling you a story. It was a few years ago. I was watching a TV show, and it was a segment about a mother who had taken her young boy and had been dressing him as a girl and sending him off to school at a very early age. And when they were doing the show, the camera was on, and the mother was standing behind the boy, who now, at the around age of 11, had very long hair. And the interviewer was interviewing the mother, and the mother's telling the interviewer about all the wonderful things that's going on with the kid and how they're going for hormone blockers and all of these things that she talked about that were so wonderful. And there was a moment in that filming where the little child, 11 years old, that had the long hair, been dressed up by his mother, turned around and looked at his mother square in the eye and said, "Mom, would you still love me if I was a boy?" So I grew up with a grandmother at the age of 4 who cross-dressed me and who made me a purple chiffon evening dress. And it was our little secret. She didn't want anybody to know. And my parents frequently left me with my grandmother as she would babysit me on the weekends. And that weekend turned into her spending her time cross-dressing me and telling me how wonderful I was and how beautiful I looked as a little girl. Now, I don't know about you, but at the time, I had no idea what kind of impact that would have. But we're tampering, aren't we, with someone's identity. And like the little boy that turned around and said, "Would you still love me if I was a boy?" I was being loved much more as a girl. She wasn't buying me cowboy boots and dressing me up and telling me what a handsome boy I was. She had made a purple chiffon evening dress and telling me how beautiful I looked. Those seeds that we plant in our young children, even more so today, because this happened to me 70 years ago. And if you think about that for a minute, here I am. I'm still talking about what Grandma did 70 years ago. So it is not benign to have a mother or a grandmother or someone repeatedly cross-dressing and affirming some young child in a gender they're not born in. As a result of that, after a couple of years, I became so accustomed to wearing that purple chiffon dress without my grandmother knowing it, I wanted to wear that at home where no one knew about it. I put it in a brown paper bag and took it home with me and hid it in my dresser drawer with all my boy clothes. Well, my mom found it. And my mom asked me about it, and when I told her, you can believe in that house, it exploded. Because this was something no one knew about. But it started a conflict between my mother and my dad. It started a conflict between my dad and my grandmother, and it just started this whole thing. So you can see just this one event, how it became this explosion in the family. And then my dad's brother found out what had happened. It became kind of the family talk. And as a result of that, my dad's brother, who was adopted, younger brother in his teens, decided that he would engage in molesting me because I had been dressing as a girl, and he would make fun of me. And he did this for some time. In fact, he took me up in the hills one time and took my clothes off because he was going to have his way with me, and I ran away. And he chased me down because he knew that he was going to get exposed for what he had done. And when I told my mother what my uncle had done, she said, "You're a liar. You've always lied about everything." And so you can see you have this grandmother infusing these ideas that you're not who you are. You have an uncle who's sexually abusing you and a mother who doesn't believe what you say. You become very withdrawn and you go inside of yourself and cope with these feelings, which, by the way, didn't go away. They continued to get stronger. And in fact, it was like a radio playing in my head about that purple dress and about who I was. It was very confusing because I could see myself as a boy. And I tried to go out and perform as a male at school because I didn't tell anybody what was going on with me. I played football. I was the kicker on the football team. I ran track. I was in theater arts. I did very well in theater arts. I played in a play at the Pasadena Playhouse. And I love theater arts. It gave me a real outlet to play some of these roles that weren't what Grandma was doing. I grew up and went out. When I graduated from high school, I got married because, unlike what most people think, a lot of transgenders are not homosexual. They're struggling with gender identity disorder and not homosexuality or same-sex attraction. I did tell my first wife that I was struggling with it, and we kind of blew it off as, no big deal, it'll go away. Well, it didn't go away. We had 2 children. I became very successful. I worked on the Apollo space missions. I became an executive with a large automobile company. But as a coping mechanism, I started using alcohol. And the alcohol made things much worse. And as the family started struggling with my alcoholism, I was also beginning to take hormones and beginning down this path of what had happened when I was 4 years old had not gone away. In fact, it was getting worse. So I went to a gender specialist in San Francisco, the guy who was the author of the Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care, because I was affluent enough to go to the best, people who really knew how to diagnose and treat people who were struggling with gender identity disorder. His name was Paul Walker. I was there, met with him, and the second session, he said, "What I think you need is to have gender reassignment surgery and go through the full change." And so I struggled with that for 2 years, but I did, like all people who get diagnosed with gender identity disorder, start taking hormones and start going through the process. And I waited 2 years, and I went back to him. And I said, "Is this for real?" And he said, "Yeah." And he wrote me a second approval letter for surgery. And Dr. Stanley Biber in Trinidad, Colorado, performed gender reassignment surgery on me when I was 42. By this time, I was divorced, and I became Laura Jensen female at the age of 42. I went and told my company that I'd been working for successfully. I was terminated, and then through the divorce and everything, I ended up several months later homeless and broke, living in Long Beach in a park. Not much of a success story. So I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous and started going to a Christian counselor in Pasadena. And I kept telling him I wanted my life back, but he says, "It looks like you're going to commit suicide." He was very concerned about it. In fact, he went home and told his wife, Lucy, he's going to kill himself. And I did try, but the Lord apparently wanted me to be here tonight because it was unsuccessful. So I started going back to church, And the first church I went to, I was still Laura, and I went to the church, and the women in the church gathered around me, and I signed the newcomer's book, and they gathered there, and they were very friendly and very nice toward Laura. And that afternoon I went home. I'd put my address in the book, and the senior pastor I saw coming from the window, my front window of my condominium, walking toward the front door. And he said, he knocked on the door and he walked in. And the only thing he said to me is, "We don't want your kind in our church." And I looked at him with a big smile. I said, "Really? What kind do you want?" Because that's really the question, isn't it? If we can't bring them in, we can't redeem and restore their lives. But thankfully, that's not the end of the story. I went to another church where they embraced me and they prayed for me and they allowed me to write a prayer letter every week about what I was going through, what I was struggling with. Yes, I was Laura while I was at that church. But they allowed me to, in fact, when I asked the pastor, I said, "Are you going to try to change me?" He says, "No." He said, "I'm not going to try to change you." He says, my job is to love you. It's God's job to change you." So the story goes, I struggled for many years. I got recovery from alcohol. And during that time, I was doing my fourth step, if people know what that is, and I'm meeting with a Christian psychologist, and we're praying. And during that prayer, which was a long prayer, and I'd spent probably 2 hours doing this fourth step with him before the prayer had started. And during the prayer, he was praying. I don't even know what he was saying, but I could see the Lord come to me. I could see him, and he had his arms outstretched. And I could see myself as a baby. And he picked me up, and he held me. And he said, "You are safe with me forever." And the prayer was over. And it was at that moment I was redeemed and restored. And there was no looking back. And to this day, the restoration continues. I have 29 years of sober living. I'm married again to my wife, Casey, for 18 years. And all of the things that were lost have been redeemed and restored because I had faith. And the Lord came to me because I gave my life to him. And anybody who struggles with these issues, we know today, are struggling with issues that happened in early childhood, and through good therapy, good counseling, prayer, and good people, all of them, if they have a desire and a willingness, can be redeemed and restored just as I have been. Thank you.